The idea was to make tree planting accessible to everyone.
Welcome to Nature Magic. Today I'm talking to Gearoid McEvoy, a 21-year-old Irish wildlife biology graduate and the founder of Reforest Nation that has just hit its goal of planting 50,000 trees in Ireland. Burren Nature Sanctuary has partnered with Reforest Nation to plant 1,000 trees this autumn. Their new goal is 1 million trees planted. Listen in to the amazing story of how one young person started Reforest Nation in lockdown during a global pandemic. So hi Gearoid, you're very welcome to the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about Reforest Nation. Where are we talking to you from today?
Hi Mary, I'm really happy to be here. I'm from County Louth, smallest county in Ireland in the northeast, about half an hour north of Dublin roughly, near the town of Drogheda.
Great. Before we ask you any of the questions, can you tell us what Reforest Nation is and how you started it? It's a very exciting story.
Yeah, so essentially it is it's in the name, I suppose. It's an initiative that wants to reforest the nation, that wants to plant a lot of trees all over Ireland and hopefully the world. And I suppose the idea was to make tree planting accessible to everyone and to help people tangibly reduce their carbon footprint and contribute to biodiversity.
Fantastic. And you had a goal of 50,000 trees. I think you just reached that goal.
I did, yeah, we did. Which
That's
I still need to
incredible.
announce. I need to get around to that. Yeah. No, it's going really good. Like the goal for this year is 100,000. It's definitely achievable. It will happen. There's a big demand from society in general to want to contribute to biodiversity. Like there's a ton of big businesses who want to support this, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes for the wrong reasons. But we're going particularly to small businesses in the beginning, because it's more fun than just going to one big guy asking for all the trees. It's better to kind of be able to help small businesses out who genuinely want to help the planet. They're not doing it because they want to look good, even though it can help them look good, and it can be good for customers to know that they're supporting a business who are actually restoring local biodiversity and fighting climate change, and even to know that certain products that they sell, you buy a product, you plant a tree. So I've done that before, where my actual phone I'm holding here in my hands, I bought that and planted a tree from a company, and I ended up picking that one because this was before I started the project, because I planted a tree, versus the other guys it was the same price but they didn't plant a tree. So it makes you feel good about buying stuff. It makes you feel like you're donating to the planet as well as getting a good product. So I wanted to create that incentive for businesses to join, and also with individuals too. The incentive is that they can reduce their carbon footprint, contribute to biodiversity, and it's much cheaper than if they wanted to do it themselves. If they wanted to go out buy the trees themselves, it would end up being a lot more expensive than €1.50 per tree, and a lot more work. And yeah, so that way we can plant 100 trees a year for less than the cost of a Netflix subscription. So
yeah, that's amazing. It really is. And so there's lots of very interesting businesses on your website, which is a very nice website, I have to say, that you did yourself.
Thank you. I spent a while designing it. Just before I launched the project, I basically spent a month designing the website to make sure it looks really legitimate. And I have a lot more things to add to it. I haven't announced it officially yet, but we're actually partnering with other initiatives outside of Ireland to plant even more trees and bring down the cost even more. Because in developing nations the tree prices are even lower than in Ireland, and it has even more of an impact because some of these places have a huge amount of biodiversity, like Indonesia, like places like Madagascar. They have a ton of biodiversity, so planting trees there is really, really important, because right now tree cover is increasing in most of the developed world. It has increased by I think double in the last 30 years, whereas in the developing nations it's been the opposite. A big reason for that, believe it or not, is because of coal. We always think of coal as being a bad thing, and it is for the most part. It's not good for the atmosphere, but because we've been burning coal in Europe and America, we haven't been using firewood. But unfortunately, in developing nations, there's a big demand for firewood. I was speaking to someone in the Gambia, and it's illegal to cut down trees for firewood there. But unfortunately, because we're so poor, it's one of the only ways people can make money is to go cut down trees and sell the firewood. So yeah, I'm really happy to be able to supporting initiatives all around the world. I think people really like the idea of planting a tree in Ireland and a tree somewhere else in the world, and obviously benefit people even more, because in a lot of these countries, people are even more to connect to nature than we are, and they really rely on nature. You know, we all rely on nature, but they rely firsthand, you know, for food security, for water security, for employment, to reduce land degradation, or you know, plant mangrove forests to reduce coastal erosion, or even threats from tsunamis. So trees have so many benefits, and I think that by supporting initiatives and using our wealth here in Ireland to plant trees in Ireland, the cheapest of any initiative in the country, while still managing to plant trees all over the world for, you know, still really cheaply, like 10 cents per tree, then we can, you know, have a really massive impact, and it'll bring us much closer to getting to a million tree goal much quicker.
Yeah, that's it. Just shows what one passionate person can do in lockdown. So it's
Yeah,
really
exactly.
incredible. It's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like we spoke before, like, and I was saying, like, you know, if it wasn't for lockdown, I wouldn't have came up with this project at all. Like, I'm a wildlife biologist. I just finished my final year, so I can call myself that now. But yeah, I was hoping to go abroad to do conservation work, because that's what I did the previous year, and I really really love that, and that's what I'm passionate about. And as much as I like trees, animals are always my real interest and passion than plants. But and trees are the foundation for a lot of ecosystems around the world, including Ireland. And I knew that if I wanted to, like initially when I started the project, I just thought it'd be Ireland. So if I wanted to help, you know, species here in Ireland and biodiversity, trees are a really good way of doing that, an efficient, quick way that people like, and it's something that can be really beneficial. So I'm glad that out of lockdown something good has happened. You know, I mean, as bad as it's been in many ways, and yeah, like I never would have thought to do something like this. And it's good that, you know, as well as doing my work abroad outside of the tree planting season, I can come back, you know, for a few months each year to Ireland and contribute to my local environment and biodiversity as well, which I didn't think I would be doing. So I'm very glad about that. So.
It's incredible. And you've been studying and doing this at the same time. It just shows what a young person can do with great energy. Can you explain to us why the Sitka spruce planting around Ireland isn't so good for biodiversity?
Yeah, so it's not just because it's Sitka spruce. It's not like Sitka spruce is this evil species. It's because of how we're planting. It's a problem all over the world, from China to Indonesia to Portugal to Ireland. You know, it's because of the way trees are planted. So it's monocultures. You know, when you plant trees in regimented rows, one or two species usually. I mean, in Ireland, I believe it's something like 85% of them are Sitka spruce. Maybe a few others are lodgepole pine that are grown. Also, another problem is not just about the lack of diversity in species, but they're not native. You know, that's also a problem with some species. Like, you know, Sitka spruce, lodgepole pine, the main ones, they're grown for timber. So they're not really grown because they're good for biodiversity. They come originally from like Western Canada, completely different ecosystem to here in Ireland. They haven't evolved with the species here, so they don't contribute to biodiversity here. On top of that, you know, in Portugal, that lit the fires a few years ago, that was caused by eucalyptus plantations. So a species that comes from Australia, grown in monocultures in Portugal. You've often heard of the palm oil plantations in Indonesia, another monoculture that's not native to the region and is just grown in, you know, massive areas and looks from a distance good, but isn't really. And you know, in Ireland, it's the conifer plantations that has been grown since, you know, about 100 years now. You know, if you go back to 1900s, there was only 1% tree cover in Ireland. We brought it way down from the most forested country in Europe. You know, you're talking 80% plus, probably more, to all the way down to just 1%, comparable to Iceland today. Actually, twice as low as Iceland. So yeah, crazy low. And we've been increasing the tree numbers, and it looks good on paper, but it's really not good for the planet or biodiversity. The Irish forestry sector is actually a net emitter of CO2. So one of the big reasons they used to kind of justify this was that they're absorbing CO2. Yeah, it's not good for the local environment. It damages our rivers because of excess runoff, because they dig a lot of drainage ditches. They also spread a lot of fertilizers on the land to grow the trees, which is really damaging to our rivers. I actually firsthand know about this because unfortunately on my own family farm, we planted citrus trees plantations in the 90s. And it's not because of anyone's fault apart from the government's, because the local farmers didn't know. They just thought a tree was a tree and they weren't doing it out of bad intent. Like I know these people because they're my family and I know that they weren't doing it out of bad intent, but unfortunately that's the way. And it's really important that we don't plant these non-native monocultures. We plant a real diverse mix of trees and try to keep them native. And if you can follow just those two simple things, you can really have a positive impact and you absorb carbon. And one of the other problems is that because the trees are being cut down, all that carbon gets released back into the atmosphere. And the way that they're planted so intensely as well, it can destroy our bogs, our grasslands, and release carbon from the soil. So tree planting is really good if we do it the right way.
Do you happen to know what percentage of Irish forestry is monoculture?
Oh, it's 90% plus around that. Yeah, like traditionally it was. I think they're making efforts now to increase. But I know like traditionally there was a quota for like 90% conifer, 10% broadleaf. Even the word broadleaf is confusing because that might make you think that's native, but actually a lot of times it's not native species of broadleaf. So that isn't great either. So you want to stick to natives if you can, and then if not, try to have a diverse mix if possible. So even when they do add these other species, it brings up maybe the tree species total to maybe 2 or 3, which isn't really good enough when you should be talking about at least 10 plus. But it's not just in Ireland. Like the entire international community has a goal in the next, I think it's like decade, to plant an area the size of India. Huge area, but 50% of that is monocultures, and they try to use it as it's basically greenwashing or tree washing, as Greenpeace say. So it's a big problem, and I just wanted to raise a bit more of awareness about it, because as much as we all love trees, unfortunately when humans get in the way and we interfere with nature and we take a species from Canada, plonk it here in Ireland and plant it huge quantities, because everything's so connected, it can have damaging effects. And like species are going extinct because of it, like the pearl mussels out in the west of the country in Kerry, because they're so sensitive. And a lot of riverine ecosystems, our rivers have deteriorated so much. Since I was born, the rivers went from being over 500 streams across Ireland being of high quality, like pristine status. They did another sample about 2 years ago, and they found that I think it was less than 10. So it's just and that even since I was born, like going further back, there was even more pristine rivers. So yeah, it's really important that we do this.
It's disastrous. And I heard as well that the Sitka spruce needles are poison for fish. So the trout has declined, not only because of the fertilizer and digging the drainage and everything, but it's actually a poison to the fish. So it's very good to get the message out to people who don't know, just to get the education out there that monocultures and tree planting for climate and biodiversity are 2 different things, and you want to go for the right thing.
Yeah, and it was really important to us that we wanted to not just plant trees because it looks good, but actually, it actually brought up the costs. Even though we're still very cheap, it brought up the cost by probably double than what it could have been, even more. We could have planted one species and it'd be really cheap, but in the end, I wanted to make sure it was a really diverse mix. So it's at least the most diverse of any initiative in Ireland. We're planting over 20 different species, up to 25 species, to really have that diversity, which I think is so important, because biodiversity, climate change are interlinked. We often see them as separate issues, but really, if biodiversity around the planet isn't doing well, it actually can speed up climate change and actually make the planet less resistant. It's almost like when you have a sick person who has a cold versus somebody who's healthy. The person who's already sick is not going to be able to withstand it as much. Like a temperature, even, probably a better metaphor for the planet. So it's similar. But unfortunately, for a long time, we've never seen it that way, and that's really important. And the good thing about trees is you can hit both those things when you plant them the right way.
And we're going into partnership with you. You're donating trees to us and we're donating a bit of land. So that should happen in the autumn. I'm very happy about that. So well done for all the work.
I'm really happy about that.
Yeah.
I really think that for initiative to be scalable and, you know, really have a big impact, it's important not just to focus on your own bit of land. Like, we have our own farm. We could have just decided to plant up the farm and that'd be it. But, you know, in the end, if we're going to have a bigger impact, we need to cooperate with everyone, all of the nature lovers, all of the, you know, climate ambassadors and custodians of our world, you know, around Ireland and the world, to actually have a really big impact. Because it's better to be this decentralized initiative that helps bring funding to, you know, to charities, to community initiatives, to landowners who want to plant up their lands, than just be centralized, and that way we can have a much bigger impact to do good. So
yeah, it's a lovely project. So you've just finished your studies, wildlife conservation, was it?
Yeah, wildlife biology and conservation was a big part of that. Yeah,
great. So do you want to tell us what your favorite animals are?
Yeah, so I actually, like, I would be lying if I said I had a favorite animal. Like, I actually have to force myself to give you one. Now I have some animals I like that I'll mention and that I find particularly fascinating, but there's so many species that I find fascinating. I could never sit down and pick one. Like, even with my job in the future, there's not one field I want to sit down and work in. Some people are like, I want to be a primatologist, I want to be you know, like work with ants, I want to do this with lizards. I really want to travel across the world and spend a few months on a different project each few months. Even if it means I don't get paid as much, I don't mind, as long as I can see as many animals as possible. So I really love them all. But one that I'm going to be working with soon is sloths. I find sloths, sloths are very cute, and that's a great attraction. But they're quite interesting, and specifically their family is interesting. You know, unfortunately now there's only two genres of sloths remaining. But, you know, if you go back, you know, even just a few thousand years ago, unfortunately humans had a role, but they were the really, really diverse group of species, really diverse, much more diverse than you might think of, because we only have one subset of them now. So you had certain sloths, and by the way, most of them were bigger than a man. So the ones we have now are quite small. They live in trees. So that's our view of sloths. Most are bigger than a man, most species. And, you know, so there was certain types that lived in the ocean and swam and were about the size of sea lions. Other types, you know, dug burrows that were so tall a man could walk through them without even ducking his head. These are 80-meter long burrows that they found in Argentina. These sloths dug through rock just a few thousand years ago. Yeah, crazy. These are giant sloths. Like, there were certain species that would climb mountains, and we found their bones in caves in Peru. And they were really, really diverse mix of species, and they fill so many niches. Another type which recently disappeared, you know, relatively recently in terms of the planet, were ones the size of an elephant with giant armor-plated skin. That were across the Americas. Like, giant sloths are extremely important for ecosystems, but unfortunately we removed them all with the megafauna extinction. I'll touch on later when we talk about rewilding. But yeah, they were really diverse. You know, there's certain species like the Joshua tree in America, and the distribution of the Joshua tree is directly linked to the distribution of the Shasta ground sloth, which was once found in North America up until about 10,000 years ago. So this species of ground sloth would eat the seeds and poop them out in certain locations, and that's directly correlated with the distribution of this sloth. If it wasn't for this sloth, there wouldn't be these trees. Another thing you can thank sloths, and particularly giant sloths in particular, for is the avocado, believe it or not. Avocado is giant sloth food, believe it or not.
So, fascinating.
Isn't that crazy? So the avocado, so they were originally eaten by giant sloths. Nothing else could actually, if you ever see the stone inside of the avocado, it's very big. Nothing nowadays can eat that. And the giant sloth could. Giant sloth went extinct when humans happened to be there. And then the humans decided to continue farming the avocado. If it wasn't for the giant slot and the humans farming it, continuing to farm it, it wouldn't still exist. And we can thank the giant slot now for that giant slot food that we love to eat and spread on toast sometimes. So.
That is fantastic. So how do you define a sloth? I mean, I know they've sort of two nails. Do they all have two nails, or what are their particular features?
Yeah, so it's hard to define. I suppose like the whole genre, because there's so many different types and so varied. But in general, there's a few different things, and obviously modern sloths, because there's only two genres, it's quite easy. Believe it or not, the two species of sloths nowadays, the two-toed sloth and the three-toed sloth, which is really kind of wrong. And that's two-toed, it's actually two-fingered. So the two-toed sloth has two fingers at the front. It has actually three toes at the back.
Right.
That's how you kind of separate them, as the two and the three-toed. They actually are not related very much. But because of convergent evolution, they both came from animals that lived on the ground and both decided to go into the canopies and live a really slow life. So for whatever reason, this seemed to be a type of existence that somehow was beneficial, even though it might not appear to be that slow and have such a slow metabolism, and extend the fact that they have to come down to poo on the ground, and 50% of the mortality is when they come down to poo. Something I learned. Like, it doesn't seem like a very practical lifestyle, but for whatever reason, evolution decided these two animals should become similar and do a similar thing. So that's why the two and the three-toed actually look similar, even though they're quite disrelated. The two-toeds kind of look a bit like a pig. They have a pig nose. The other guys have more of an almost human-looking face. But yeah, they usually have teeth that doesn't have enamel, which allows us just to keep regrowing and regrowing and regrowing. So eat as much as they want. That's one characteristic. They have like very ribbon-like muscles. Their muscles have just become ribbons at this stage because they barely use them. Yeah, they're very interesting animals. They're so slow. The algae grows on their back.
They're incredible.
We measure their speed in feet per second, not miles per hour.
And were all the prehistoric sloths, were they all slow, or is that could be something no, they weren't.
No.
Yeah, wow.
No, they weren't at all. So these guys got a really slow metabolism. The ones nowadays, they have a very slow metabolism, which correlates to a low body temperature, and that makes animals traditionally quite slow. The giant anteater in Argentina is similar. It wouldn't be quite as extreme, but it's quite slow. It has a slow metabolism also. It basically makes it very efficient. It's not good for getting away. They're often preyed upon by the harpy eagle. I'm going to Costa Rica, by the way. That's where I'm going to work, and there's a lot of sloths out there. So hopefully I'll see some in the wild and also in the center I'm working in. But yeah, so there's advantages to their lifestyle because it is so efficient. Because they blend in, the actual algae that grows on their back helps them blend in with the trees. And yeah, it means they can live off very poor nutrient food. But yeah, they weren't always that slow. That's just one subset. The last giant sloths went extinct only 3,500 years ago on the island of Hispaniola. So it basically went extinct when humans arrived on the island, kind of like wherever else. So yeah, they're a very recent thing. And, I'll get into it later, but there's a lot of animals that should be in the ecosystem that aren't. And without them, you have these massive gaps. And we only can ponder what the ecosystem would be like if we brought them back or if we had them.
Yeah. So. Well, that was a really, really interesting animal to pick. And have you got a profound experience in nature that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah. So I suppose I've had a good few. I hope to have a lot more, as I travel, because I really want to just travel across the world. I mean, I can't say I've had a ton, and I'll be honest, because I've been in Ireland most of my life, where a lot, the nature is kind of subdued compared to some parts of the world. But you have like small little experiences. But one really cool one was about this time last year, on my farm. The amount of starlings that arrived on my farm was just. You were talking on the last podcast I listened to about de-extinction. You're talking about the passenger pigeon, which I happened to do a whole essay on for my work in college.
Really? Wow.
It wasn't like the passenger pigeon, but it was a lot of starlings. Like I can send you videos of it. I've never seen so many birds in my life. I didn't even know you could have that many starlings in one place. They were coming for the last few years, every year around the same time. They still haven't arrived yet. I'll see what happens. But they were coming every year, and each year you get more and more. So they obviously were, and they were sitting on the telegraph poles and stuff. Yeah, I don't know if they were telling each other this was a good location to come to, Like, because they're from Scandinavia, these guys, they're coming from Scandinavia. So obviously word got through, and each year it was like becoming a festival. It was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people are coming to see it, or more starlings are coming to see it. And by last year, it was just crazy. The amount of birds that could come out of one hedge, I couldn't believe. It was like you had opened like a tunnel to another dimension, and you were shooting starlings through it. It was like a wormhole of starlings coming out the hedge. Like you look at the hedge is black from a distance. And wondering, why is the hedge black? And you go towards it, and like you think it's going to stop, but it doesn't. They just keep coming out of the hedge for like minutes, like streams and streams of starlings. Like the whole area, there probably was upwards of like hundreds of thousands of
That's
starlings.
amazing. There must be
farm.
That's amazing. There must be a lot of food for them there. Otherwise they wouldn't be there.
I mean, like, definitely not enough to support that many. Maybe in the general area. I mean, they like grasslands. They like open ecosystems. Like before, when we didn't have woodlands, or when we had woodlands, there probably weren't as numerous in Ireland. It was when we removed our woodlands, created more of a grassland ecosystem, the last species came into Ireland, like the corncrake, like starlings. Starlings have like long legs. They have a long beak to probe for insects. They're very adapted to grasslands. So they can still do well in Ireland. Unlike some species, they can still do well, but I believe their population is actually declining quite a lot. So it was good to see so many. I think the population declined 40%, which actually is a lot, but some species is even more. So it was really good to see so many, to know that, there is still a lot of them in certain areas, and hopefully they can do even better, because it's just an amazing sight. It's called a murmuration when you have a lot of starlings. In Rome, they're a massive problem because they fly above the city, and it kind of looks like it snowed afterwards. From all the bird poop on the cars, like like the cars are destroyed. I always noticed that. I was working in a seabird colony, and we had a lookout post, and one day I went to sit on it after the starlings had perched there, and it was just white. Yeah. But no, they're great. I mean, that's natural fertilizer. If it wasn't for humans adding all excess fertilizer, that would be like the natural fertilizer that would be given to the land. That all has a role,
Yeah. So, that's an amazing
perception.
Amazing.
That was a cool experience for me.
Amazing description. Really, really good. Well done.
I will send you videos.
Do. We'll post them. I don't suppose they wanted the fertilizer in Rome. Can you talk about what it would be like if we did reforest part of Ireland, and what species you'd like to see coming back?
Yeah. So I believe that, reforestation is just part of rewilding. And I mean, like, there's two ways you can get reforestation. You can just leave the land, let it do its thing. That's what NEP did in the UK with Isabella Tree. They just left the land do its thing, and the trees came back. You can do that, but if you want to kind of accelerate the process, because we don't really have much time, if everything we should be doing right now should be trying to do it as quickly as possible, because we don't have time in the biodiversity crisis, climate change, it's all under time limits, unfortunately. So yeah, you could let the trees regenerate naturally in Ireland, but the problem with that is because we've removed so much of our woodlands, we've reduced the diversity quite a lot. So you might have one species like ash, and it's really good at regenerating. Problem is, the ash is all dying, so even if it does regenerate, it probably will be killed. I heard you have a lot of issues with ash dieback in the Burren. We have it here. My 40-year project, I did an ash dieback, and we found 98% of the ash in my area had it. So it's not looking good for the ash, which is our most populous tree in Ireland. They estimate like 15 billion damage will be done to the UK economy when it gets all removed. So that's a big incentive to plant more trees, because it's our most numerous tree in terms of like biomass. So it's important to plant even more trees to replace it. So when you plant a lot of different new species into an area, you're bringing back a lot of species that weren't there because of historic deforestation. So it's kind of like introducing extinct animals. In my area, like, there's a lot of species you might have the spindle tree, you might have rowan, things like that. We don't have that growing in my local area, and I can't say why. It could be to do with the local conditions, but they seem to be going fine when we planted them. Likely because of just, historic deforestation. So yeah, tree planting is part of the puzzle of rewilding. I don't think you should just cover the entire country in trees. I don't think that's the best for anything. I think in nature you want a patchwork ecosystem. Traditionally, that's always what it was. We often, or scientists always kind of taught, like, going back, to the natural state, you would just have a forest across Europe, going from one end to the other, to the point where a squirrel could just, run across the whole thing, no problem. That's what we used to think. We now believe it was a patchwork because we didn't take into account all the animals that once lived across Europe that actually opened up those forests.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where rewilding comes in. I was listening. I can't remember the name of the man who you were talking to on your last podcast, but it was very interesting.
Conor O'Brien.
He was really interesting, and he covered a ton of stuff that I probably would have overlapped to it if I hadn't listened to it.
Okay.
But yeah, he was talking a lot about species that once lived here, and he did briefly talk about it. It's like, it's important that we recognize that a lot of species that went extinct recently. Now, when I say recently, the past like 20,000 years, up to maybe 50,000 years, they're animals that probably would often still exist if it wasn't for humans, because of a thing called the megafaunal extinctions. And this brings into the context of why you would rewild. It's like, why would you decide to bring back certain animals into a habitat? Why bring back wild boar, wolves, woolly mammoth, even if they were able to? Why would you do this? It all comes back to the megafaunal extinctions. So we evolved in Africa as a species, and because of that, the animals there evolved with us. So they became cute to us. They became, they knew what we were about. And these are guys we need to watch.
Okay.
Don't be too close to these guys, because they'll take your calf. Like, they'll take your young. So because we were a predatory species. So the animals there were adapted. So since the last about 20,000 years, only about 15% of the megafauna, which, to put into context, it's an animal bigger than 44 kilos is considered a megafauna. So you know that. So technically, a cow is a megafauna, a horse is, an elephant is.
Okay.
So that's megafauna. So only 15% there have went extinct. Now, because unfortunately we've been so destructive, that's still quite a large number. But compared to other continents where they didn't evolve with us, Africa's done great. When you often think of Africa, you think of a place with loads of big animals. You don't think about that maybe so much with Europe and South America and Australia, but that's the way it was. Every continent was like Africa. And then as they spread out, you can see the rates of megafauna extinctions increase significantly more. In Europe, it was like, I think, around 40 to 50%. By the time you got to the Americas, you're talking like 80%. Same with Australia, probably higher, like towards 90% megafaunal loss in the last few thousand years, which is a blink of an eye. Traditionally they were like, oh, they went extinct because of climate change and because, but no, it was because of humans, and it was in combination with climate change. That's the important thing. So the climate was changing, but historically the animals always adapted. Yes, populations declined, but they adapted. If you go back to the last interglacial period, which is a time in Earth's history that is like now, as in the ice caps have retreated, we're no longer in an ice age. It was 126,000 years ago. Sea levels were actually higher than it is now. It was 2 degrees warmer, and woolly mammoths survived it, and so did polar bears.
Okay.
So that's really important. We often think about climate change. It's just this one thing. It's all because of climate change. It's all because of sea level rise and temperatures that everything's going to die. It's actually because of we've weakened the planet with that. It's a combination of the two. It's like a double whammy. So when you spread across the globe, you had that double whammy. So, I'm not going to talk about every continent, as amazing as they are. You had marsupial lambs with opposable thumbs in Australia. You had the giant sloths, I was saying, in the Americas. Short-faced bears, 4-meter tall bears. Giant animals. Like, you had cheetahs in America. You had mammoths across the world. The Colombian mammoth lives in America. They often actually say that maybe we should introduce elephants back into the prairie ecosystems because they're so dependent on the Colombian mammoth, which is like a southern species of mammoth, which was hairless like an elephant. Europe was similar. So animals that should still exist in Europe if there was no human intervention would be lions. They would be the top predator. Cave lions, they're about 20%, 30% bigger than a modern lion or African lion. We still have paintings of them. They were maneless of the paintings that humans drew of them. We'd have oryx, which is the ancestor of the cow. They only went extinct 1600 years ago. You'd have leopards. You'd have hyenas, as we found, as Connor was telling you. We actually found hyena bones in the cave in Ireland. We had 2 species in Ireland. One of them we know of for sure. The other one was across Europe, so you could safe bet it was in Ireland because we were connected to the rest of the continent. So you had the cave hyena, which was twice as big as a modern hyena, and you had the spotted hyena in Europe also, which was still found in Africa. You had scimitar cats, which is a type of a saber-tooth cat. You also had like things that you really wouldn't expect, like hippos. We actually found hippo bones underneath the Thames in London.
Amazing.
So hippos should actually be there right now. It seems crazy, but they should, because the last time the world was this temperature, which, it's like a cycle. We go into an ice age, we go out of one, we go into one, we go out of one. Last time it was like this, all these animals were there. Another really, really important species is we had 2 species of rhino in Europe, Merck's rhino, and I believe it's called the short-nosed rhino. You're that, a short-lipped rhino, something like that. That had different niches. One lived in the woodlands, one lived in the savannas, and the straight-tusked elephant as well. So elephants are native to Europe. They should be in Europe. The trees are adapted to elephants. In areas where you have no big animals with elephants, trees will, when they snap, they don't regrow, but the trees in Ireland do, which replicates the same as what the acacia trees in Africa do when they get pushed down by elephants. All of our plants have actually adapted with these big animals. When you see gorse, nothing eats gorse really, but what does? Rhinos would eat gorse because they'd be big enough to be able to eat it. There's spiky plants I've seen actually in the Burren growing in the middle of the turlocks, which probably hippos would have fed on. Our hawthorn trees, are crazy spines on them for just deer. I don't know if you ever see the spines in hawthorn trees, but they get very big. Like I've seen ones that are like that big. Yeah. Same as an acacia tree in the African savannah, because the hawthorn tree would have been particularly pressurized by elephants because hawthorns live on the edge of the woodlands. Yeah. The edge. Wow. And then you look at the holly tree. What does the holly tree do? It doesn't live on the edge. It lives further in where species of rhino would be, but rhino feed on the ground. They don't go high up like elephants. So what does the holly tree do? It puts the spikes on the leaves on the ground. You go high up to the holly tree, high up in it, no spikes, because it's only adapted to the rhino, because the elephant's not going to get it because it's in the middle of the woodlands where the elephants aren't. So all of these clues are there in our landscape, but it's being forgotten because by the time we realized that all it was already gone, like by 10,000 years ago, by the time people had got to Ireland, pretty much most of the animals were already gone. Bar few, which then, led to extinction then. So our whole view of what natural has been warped. We think, the top predator in Europe's a wolf, and wolves, bears, you think of them, which they're all part of the ecosystem, but they weren't like dominant species. They were kind of like secondary carnivores behind things like the lions and the cave bears and the saber-tooth cats. These are all the top predators. But what's amazing is you have in America with Yellowstone, when they introduced the wolf, and it's kind of a classic example. It brought back so many different species and changed the entire ecosystem to the point where it's changing the course of rivers indirectly through all these actions. In America, wolves were fairly far down the ecosystem traditionally. You'd actually have a thing called, which are in Game of Thrones, believe it or not, is the dire wolf, which was twice as big as a modern wolf, which were feeding on bigger animals. The wolves stuck to the small bison and to the deer. The dire wolf stuck to the even bigger bison, which are unfortunately now extinct, guys with horns about twice the length of a man. Big guys, and giant camels. Camels are originally from America, and they should still exist there. And these were giant camels, so they hunted them. So you would think, how would our modern day predators compete? It's because they devise ecosystem to niches. It's like a fox and a wolf. They have different prey, and that's how it all works. So what's incredible to think is, if this is what happens to Yellowstone when you just introduce a wolf, imagine what would happen to the entire ecosystem of the world if you were introducing these massive predators that would likely have even more of an impact because they're even higher up and they have their effects are even more varied. Traditionally in ecology, we thought that everything stemmed from the climate. we thought the climate dictates the ecosystem. It's all from the bottom up. It goes from climate, then the weather, the plants, and then so on, and it goes up to the ecosystem. That's how the ecosystem's determined. But we now know that a huge amount of it is also based on the species that live there. The man you're speaking to on the last podcast was talking about the mammoth steppe ecosystem, and that's a classic example. Which is something I would be interested in working with in the future. There's a place called Pleistocene Park who's trying to reestablish it, and I think that would be a great thing to tie into, because I want to create like a kind of overall climate change type of membership where you can kind of fight all the different, get connected with all the different climate change solutions, and that's one is mammoth steppe ecosystem, because that used to be the largest ecosystem on Earth, and it's now almost gone. Like literally a few thousand years ago, largest on Earth, and still would be technically. And then because we removed all these large animals across Europe, you know, you would still now you would have woolly mammoths. You'd have them up in Siberia, and then you would have straight-tusked elephants, which I didn't actually say this, but they're twice the size of mammoths, twice the size of African elephants. The ones that used to live in Europe right now, like that would have lived right now, they're about 11 tons, 12 tons.
Gosh.
So 3 to 2 times bigger than an African elephant. So massive animals, and they helped to facilitate the mammoth steppe ecosystem from Siberia to Spain, because they provided the fertilizer and the right type of grazing structure to create this steppe, which instead of being tundra, which is like a very low productivity desert ecosystem, to a mammoth steppe, which is really rich, has loads of these lush grasses, and that feeds huge amount of herbivores. And they didn't know this would work, but they tried it in an area of Siberia. Now, unfortunately, don't have mammoths yet. They're working on it, as you learned in the last podcast. Now, they've been even since I was small, like I'm only like 21, but even when I was small, I remember they'd be like, "Oh, in 5 years' time, we'll have the mammoth ready." 5 years' time, and every 5 years would come, and they'd never have it ready. But I'd say we're in 2 decades.
Within the next, within 2 decades. Okay, right.
Yeah, like once they can find a way to put it into the Indian elephant, the Spanish ibex, that worked out, even though it didn't live too long afterwards. But the fact that it even had a baby of an extinct species was amazing. So if they could find out a way to do that. But right now, what they're using to replicate the mammoths is they're using vehicles. These they're like, I don't know what exactly they are, but they're using these 4x4 vehicles actually to knock down the trees. And that facilitates what the mammoths did. And trees are, in many places in the world, trees are better than grassland often at absorbing CO2. But up in these high latitudes, trees aren't actually as good because of the cold, because of the growth rates. The grass actually will absorb way more, and it will protect the permafrost also. A big problem now is the world's warming. You have the permafrost melting. This actually serves as an insulative layer. All this grass, which grows over on top of each other, decays and forms layers and layers and layers. It stops the permafrost from melting. So it's really important we establish this ecosystem. And they're using things like horses, camels, they're using bison, different types of cow to kind of fit niches of bison. While they get the bison numbers up, the cows kind of stand in. They have loads of different animals that they're adding in.
Where is
which
this?
Were native to the region.
Where is the project?
I think it's near Kalmykia in Siberia. It's the way out eastern Siberia. Pleistocene Park, it's called. You can, if anyone's interested, you can support them on their website. They have different memberships to support what they're doing. It's basically a science experiment to see, can it work. They're also using reindeer. They can look. It's very easy for them because everything's melting. The ground is melting. They're finding mammoth tusks coming out of the ground all the time with all the other animals that once lived there. They can actually look, and these guys are really good scientists. Like, it's incredible what they've done. They're just a family of people, and they've been amazing what they've done. And they're looking into what this ecosystem was, and they actually can determine for every square kilometer there was one mammoth at least. There was like something like a 20 reindeer, this many horses, this many bison. And, they could work out that on the mammoth steppe ecosystem scale, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of these animals on a scale like never before. Like you would never expect. Like right now, biomass wise, wild animals are only about 4% of the entire biomass of the planet. what like mammals, that is. Everything from a whale to a mouse accounts for 4%. And the other 96% makes up, I think there's like something like 10-20% is human, and the rest is all livestock.
Interesting.
If you go back, like even to America, there was enough animals to meet roughly about 85% of what we have in terms of livestock now. So comparable numbers to what we breed now, and we're breeding animals in the billions now. But actually, at one time, we had that many animals across the entire Mammoth Steppe, billions and billions of these animals, like you would never see now. And it was such a productive ecosystem. It could support more animals than we can, even in our intensive agriculture systems. And even with all these animals, they weren't causing climate change. They're actually fighting it. Even though we now think of a lot of livestock as causing it, when everything's working together, it actually fights it, and it's resilient. And I was saying this before, when the entire ecosystem of the world is healthy, it can withstand climate change. And that's how the polar bears manage to survive even higher sea levels, 2 meters higher than today, and about 1 to 2 degrees warmer than today, which if you talk about now, that's our tipping point right now, is like 2 degrees warmer than normal. That's tipping point. Because we've weakened it, because we've weakened the ecosystems, they were much stronger in the past. So it was like a healthy immune system, and we've weakened it. So
they were resilient.
It's really important. Exactly. So it's really important we don't just talk about climate change. We talk about the biodiversity crisis, because that has been the biggest crisis over the last thousands of years, really, even more so in the last few hundred years. But it was like a crisis we never even realized was happening until it was already way underway. I think David Attenborough talked about it in his last program. He was talking about how when he was young, he felt like the world went on forever, like the ecosystem, the wilderness went on forever, and it was untouched. And it was only now, even though so much of that has disappeared, that he realized even back then, what he thought the way the world was actually had already been changed. It was just his view. And as you were saying in the previous podcast about how our perceptions of the world has changed over time. So as you're saying, you're talking about wildflower meadows, which was once the biggest ecosystem in Ireland, after we removed the trees. It obviously wasn't good we removed them, but a new ecosystem came into play. And that was really good, and unfortunately we even lost that, and it was
because it's the same story. We have monoculture of grasses,
perennial ryegrass,
perennial ryegrass. But it's interesting how the plants that are left are giving us the clues to the animals that have gone before.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's the whole ecosystem has these signs, but we don't see it. Like you know what the whole thing about the criticism people have of rewilding. Now, there's different stages of rewilding. Like you could have purely letting it do its own thing. Then you have the step of bringing in species that we know live there. In recent times, when I say recent times, maybe like 2,000 years. Like the fact we know lynx were in Ireland, the fact we know like wild boar were here and wolves were here. Yeah, bring them back as next. And then the further step down is to bring back extinct species, or even species that aren't native but fill roles of extinct species. Like an elephant has the exact same role as the Columbian mammoths. Even though they're not the same species, it would make sense that they would fill the same niche. And I know people are like, oh well, what about all the times we've introduced invasive species? Yes, that's a massive problem. It caused so much damage to invasive species. But an elephant isn't quite the same, because an elephant will never reproduce the way cane toads do. It's not something that would get out of hand. There's way too many elephants.
Not like rabbits.
Before it's too late, we're overrun by elephants. Like they have like one baby at a time.
And they're easily seen. You can spot them quite easily.
Yeah. And if you could do it on a controlled area, have a certain area of prairie in America, put in some elephants, see how it does. I mean, they have it. They have elephants in captivity. I don't see why they couldn't try it.
Yeah.
And then once they see if that's okay, then extend it to a bigger area and see. Obviously, it'd have to be an area that was suitable to be a national park and whatever. But it's something you could try out and see if you can't bring some of these species back because you don't have the DNA, you could still replicate the role in the ecosystem by finding something similar, which I think is really interesting. But I don't know if you heard about the wild boar recently that were shot in Kerry.
Yeah, I know. That was so tragic. I mean, the poor things.
I find it very confusing. Like the fact they're listed as an invasive species, even though they're native, and they're actually really important to the ecosystem because they dig up the ground, which aerates the soil. It also allows other plants to grow, because if you imagine there's a lot of plants growing in a woodland, they create a new area for new plants to grow, and allow species that might not otherwise have grown. And they have a really important benefit.
Yeah, people who don't know the story, there was a family of poor wild boar. I think they were probably a cross of wild boar, maybe some pets that had escaped or something. Anyway, they were in Kerry, and there was a little video of them. Somebody shook a bucket and they all came up wagging their tails. I mean, they're completely harmless.
I didn't know there was a video.
Yeah, there's a little video. They're all wagging their tails and, hanging around. And then the next thing, they went out and shot all the family, apart from the male, who they eventually captured and shot. But anyway, at the same time, there's a story in England about this pig that escaped from a factory farm, Matilda. And they found her in a forest. Matilda, and she was huge, and she'd had piglets by herself in the forest. So the sanctuaries went to go and rescue her, and then Tesco wanted her back because she was part of their farm. So anyway, there was a massive GoFundMe to save Matilda.
Isn't that funny?
She's in a sanctuary now. She's a big pig. And then on the other side, here we are panicking about 4 little feral piglets. Anyway, it's about people's perception of what's going on. But it's great to explain this to people. People need to know and to be able to see possible futures with these animals in their future.
Yeah. When I learned about this a few years ago, like, it really turned my world upside down. When I first read books and stuff that were teaching us this, because up until about 20 years ago, this wasn't the known thought in ecology about any of this. So when I learned this, I was like, what? So you're telling me that this is the way the world should be? So it's not just the animals we have now. Like, when you think of wild Romania, you think of maybe some bears, some wolves, some lynx. They're great. They're part of the ecosystem. But you're telling me we also technically should have what we have in Africa, or similar species. Like in Australia, they should have 2-ton wombats and, giant birds and 6-meter long lizards. And the whole reason Australia is dry is because of that. I won't get into that, but because we removed them, and it changed the ecosystem again. So it really turns the world upside down when you realize this, and it's really amazing to think, and it's fascinating. It's also very sad at the same time. But
I think education is the point, and it is to tell people, get it out there, get your messages out there. And before we get totally involved in all of that, can you tell everybody how they go about getting the trees if they want to join Reforest Nation, what the process is?
Yeah, the best way they can support us is just on the website. We have memberships, and we also have a one-time tree adoption. The memberships are even cheaper because it means that we can reliably source a certain amount of trees each year, get them in bulk, bring down the prices even more. They can look and see what they want to do. Like, maybe they want to just offset their footprint, or maybe they want to go a bit further and have a really big impact, plant a forest each year or something like that. Or they can, look at their family members, and maybe they want to decide the whole family wants to reduce their carbon footprint. And it's something we want to make accessible. And also in the future, when we are planting the trees, they can come out and plant them themselves with us. So anyone who sponsors the initiative is most welcome to come out and plant with us on tree planting days that we have in the future. So they can, it's really tangible, and they can actually see the trees they've sponsored. So
that's really cool. So what's the website?
It's reforestnation.ie.
Great. So if you had that magic wand, what would you do? I think I know what you're going to do with the planet.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Okay, so it's a toss up between reduce the human population because it sounds very like Maoist or something like that, like something like a communist leader would do. But it's most of the problems in the world all come back to overpopulation ultimately. Most of them, or at least to do with a lot of our own problems, but mostly the environmental problems all just come back to overpopulation. I mean, there's so many different things you could talk about. What causes you could talk about so many different problems, but ultimately, if there wasn't a lot of people, we'd never be able to make all the problems happen. So ultimately, I would love to reduce the population and make sure that we didn't just have vacant cities. I mean, reduce the amount of the cities, so everything would be in proportion. It wouldn't be all of a sudden, most people are gone. No one's able to run anything because there's not
No,
enough
that'd be a
people.
bit freaky.
I'd want to sustainably reduce it, so it wouldn't feel like everyone's disappeared. It would just feel like you're living in the 1500s, but with advanced technology. Either that, or like you're saying, like rewilding. Like if we could, even though it wouldn't open up all the areas of the world, and it wouldn't maybe reduce the current, like extinction crisis happening, like maybe depopulation would. It would be good to be able to at least have those animals there. So if we had areas that we were going to open up to create into wilderness, we could have them there, because that would just be amazing for the ecosystems. Like so many different processes, because everything is connected. Like as I was saying, like I was not going to get into it, but I will just briefly. In Australia, they believe the reason it's a desert now is because a huge amount of it was covered in forest. Humans arrived there for quite a while, and they lived fairly good harmony with the species there. Things like you think of the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. That's not a top predator there. That's like a jackal. It was really the marsupial lion, which is just called a lion because it was a similar predator to a lion. And it was the top predator. And you also had Megalania, which was a 6-meter long lizard. You had types of anteater, which were their own species of marsupial anteater. You had the giant wombats, about 2-ton wombats, which were the big kind of elephant kind of species of the area.
Okay.
You also had short-faced kangaroos, which were giant kangaroos that were so big they couldn't hop. So you had them too. So humans started lighting a lot of fires, which was very practical because it's a great way to kill a lot of animals and kind of get rid of the predators, and you end up having loads of cooked bodies you can eat. It's very practical in a way, but unfortunately the fires caused a lot of damage. They also hunted the young of a lot of species, like all over the world. Like it wasn't like they just hunted the big animals, because that would be quite hard. So what humans have done is they've hunted the small guys, the calves.
I never
and
thought
because
of that.
most megafauna are slow with reproducing, it means you only have a certain amount for it to have a cascading effect. Like with the mammoth steppe, we removed a few mammoths, a few big herbivores. It meant that there was slightly more trees because there was fewer mammoths, which meant less space for mammoths, which meant less mammoths, which meant more trees, and the cycle just kept increasing until just a small tipping point of maybe a reduction of 20% led to the complete collapse of the ecosystem. It's crazy. And they think similar happened in Australia. And when they removed these giant herbivores, nothing ate the leaf litter off the forest floor. And there's something that happens when you have a lot of built up of leaf litter, as you see in certain parts of Australia now, which is fires happened, and they raged across the continent, and they think that changed the climate of Australia, which I'm not saying it was a lush tropical forest, but it didn't have quite as much desert as it has now. So a huge area of land got replaced by desert that was once forest and was kept there intact by all these species. So
what were the herbivores?
The most
which were the herbivores in Australia?
So native herbivores, I think it's called Dipterodon, something like that. There's a few different species of it. It's about a 2-ton wombat, about bigger than a rhino.
And it's wow.
Yeah, herbivore. So there's so many different species.
Fantastic.
You had like the giant kangaroos. By the way, all these guys lived with what's there now. It's not like they replaced them. Everything there now just fitted into the ecosystem perfectly. You had the types of anteaters. You had actually giant birds, 2-meter tall birds.
Right.
What's most interesting is that the last megafauna are really, really recent, because some of the last places where there was megafauna were islands. And why? Because they were the last places we got to. And the megafauna wasn't as big because in islands they can't support as big sizes. But often when you get like a species arriving in islands, it can grow too, because maybe that species fills a niche where it couldn't have before. So that's why in New Zealand, up until a few hundred years ago, you had the moa, which was the tallest bird ever, which was descended from a tiny little bird. And there you had the Harst eagle, which was the biggest eagle ever that preyed upon it. And there was loads of different species of moa across Australia. In Madagascar, which people only arrived at, I think, like crazy recent, like 1,500 years ago, something like that. They still find bones, like not fossilized bones and eggshells. Like you find eggshells of these birds called elephant birds, which are similar to the moa, except are much heavier. They weigh about 1 ton,
Oh
something
my
like that, up to 1 ton,
gosh.
which is crazy for a bird.
Could
I
they
have a farm.
fly?
Like we
Are they flying
no
or
no no
no,
no
just walking
no
around
no they
like penguins?
no, but
No.
yeah. But Marco Polo actually talked about it because this is so recent. Marco, like they only went extinct about 500 years ago. Marco Polo talked about a bird that could carry away elephants. Now they think he was it kind of was like Chinese whispers, like the story changed. That's what's called the elephant bird. But he was right. I mean, what they found was these massive big eggshells are about this size, like about twice, like 50% bigger than the basketball. And then they thought, well, some massive bird must have made this, so it must have been so big to carry away an elephant. So that's where they thought of that. And there was them, and there was also lemurs the size of gorillas, and there was giant fossas. I don't know if you know the fossa, which hunts lemurs. There was bigger species of them, which is like the top predator in Madagascar. There was also smaller species too, like the Malagasy hippo, and which was only about the size of a pig. And actually, believe it or not, I was watching a program recently called I can't remember the name of it, but it's about a guy called Forrest Galanti. He's a wildlife biologist like me, and he goes around the world finding animals that were once extinct. Amazing program, and he's been incredibly successful, believe it or not. He's found tortoises on the Galapagos that they thought were extinct over 100 years. He's found leopards in Zanzibar that were believed to extinct. He found extinct species of caiman. He also found, well, he didn't prove it, but he found potential proof of the Javan tiger still existing. But one really cool thing is he went to Madagascar, and actually the locals had stories of the Malagasy hippo still existing. And even very recently, like within the last 100 years, they could have been there. And they know this because he literally, like, I don't know, he has some luck, this guy. They found like a tusk on the side of this dried up riverbank because it was a drought, so everything had kind of collected. They found a little tusk. And they were like, whoa, this could be a hippo tusk. And like, if they didn't keep searching, you think, well, it might have been a hippo tusk. It could have been something else. It might have been a pig tusk. He decided to look beside it. They were not dredging, but like they were sticking their hands all through the mud in this dried up, horrible, disgusting riverbank. And they spent like a few hours there, him and a woman. And he literally pulled up a skull of an unfossilized skull of a Malagasy hippo, dwarf hippopotamus, unfossilized. They thought this animal went extinct like 1,500 years ago, but actually this guy was dated to less than 200.
Oh my goodness!
It's even though it does seem like the megafauna extinction was so recent ago, like blah, blah, the ecosystem's changed since then, which isn't true. Like the ecosystem can't change that quickly. But the last pockets of where these megafauna existed were very recent because they were the islands. Like what John Slott's in the Caribbean. So that just shows you how recent it is, and that really it's up to us. If we remove them, it's up to us to fix it. You know, it's not unnatural. What we did was unnatural.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it because it's such a hopeful message.
Yeah,
you know that he's.
I hope so.
All is not lost. Have you a nature book that you'd like to recommend to people?
Yeah. I was thinking about this because this interlinks with all this is a really good book called How Do We Get Into This Mess? I think it's called by George Monbiot, and he talks about a lot of things, but he also talks a lot about the megafauna extinctions, and he's great because I don't know if you've ever seen the video on YouTube. If anyone wants to look it up about how wolves change the course of rivers. He's a great voice, and he talks about how the introduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park has had so many implications for the rest of the ecosystem. And it just trickled down. In fact, it's called trophic cascades, by the way. I should have mentioned that. This thing that happens when you introduce these large animals that fit an extinct niche, it's called a trophic cascade because it cascades through the trophic layers, starting with the top predators, then to the herbivores, all the way to the plants. So that's a good book. The other books I like is Sapiens. Now it's actually about human history, really.
It's a really cool book.
It's really good, and it does talk about a bit about the megafauna extinction, especially in the beginning, and how we interlinked with the world and the other species of humans that we outcompeted. There was actually 7 species of humans, and we outcompeted them all until very recently. The most recent one was like the Hobbit, which lived only about 500 years ago on the islands of Indonesia. Believe it or not, so a story for another day.
Wow.
You'd know about hobbits being a thing, no?
No.
No. Yeah, no, we had to contend with a lot of different species. Even the Dutch talked about them, potentially seeing them. So, but you should look that up. It's called Homo florensis. That's the scientific name. It was a hobbit, a meter tall, little humans like us. And the locals talked about this pot-bellied man with a strange, hairy face, speaking a strange language in the forest. And no one believed them until they found the bones. Until about 2003, I think they found the bones.
Oh, amazing.
But yeah. So the other book was Sapiens, and it talks a lot about how humans have progressed and how we are so intertwined with the natural world. And it's just a fantastic read in general if you want to put in context where we are right now with the natural world and where we're going in the future. It's a great book, so I recommend both those books.
Well, look, Gearoid, thank you so much for really explaining to everybody, and in such a passionate way, because information needs to be out there, and it's fascinating, it's so interesting, and I'm sure everybody will really enjoy the conversation. You know what, we'll have to have you on again in a few months' time, so I'm sure there'll be more, especially if you go on your trip around the world. Sounds really exciting. Well, thank you so much, and well done for all you've done with Reforest Nation. Everybody look up the website. It's fantastic what you've managed to get off the ground in lockdown, so well done.
Thank you so much, Mary. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Nature Magic. We have exciting news. Our cafe and gift shop will be opening with new tenants next Wednesday, the 14th of July, 2021. Walks will be free to access, but the indoor and outdoor play areas will be closed. It will be lovely to welcome people back to Burren Nature Sanctuary for the first time since Christmas. Pop in to support Michael and Rose in their new venture.